We made this.
Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, is now on Patreon, where you can support the show's production and gain access to all kinds of bonus features and content. To subscribe, check out what we offer at patreon.com/Make It So podcast. That's patreon.com/Make It So podcast. Thanks for listening, and Helmsman,
engage. I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise.
Michael Burnham, pleased to meet you.
What we leave behind is not as important as how we've lived.
We will continue exploring, discovering new worlds, new civilizations. That is the United Federation of Planets. That is Starfleet.
Make it so.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast for the We Made This podcast network. I'm your host today, Kurt North, and joining me to discuss this episode is Craig McKenzie. Hello, Craig. How are you doing, mate?
Hello, I'm doing good, although I've got the strangest urge that I've had this podcast discussion before. I don't know why that is, but...
And joining me to discuss this episode is Craig McKenzie. Hello, Craig. How are you doing, mate?
Hello, I'm doing good, although I've got the strangest urge that I've had this podcast discussion before. I don't know why that is, but...
And joining me to discuss this episode is Craig McKenzie. Hello, Craig. How are you doing, mate?
Hello, I'm doing good, although I've got the strangest urge that I've had this podcast discussion before. I don't know why that is, but...
What do you think, just before we start kicking off into all kinds of territories, you were last on Nepenthe, wasn't it? The last episode of Star Trek Picard. What did you make to the finale of Star Trek Picard and how the season as a whole came together?
I wasn't hugely impressed with the ending of Picard, to be honest. I think that everything they promised early on didn't pay off a great deal. They misused the Borg stuff, the Picard plotline didn't really go anywhere. They got rid of the synth ban, spoilers, like with a throwaway line. It just seemed like they bit off more than they could chew in those 10 episodes, but I think they could have done something with it if they'd kept the focus. But once they started answering the questions, I just rapidly lost interest, and then I didn't like the ending much at all, which is a shame. I think I had a more venomous reaction to it when I first saw it, but since I did my own podcast about the first season, it was a bit more measured. You know, I could see some merit to it, but I still wasn't a huge fan. I'm hoping season 2 will be better. Okay, well, yeah, I don't think you'll have much more of a visceral reaction than I did with the finale of The X-Files, season 11, where I left it with sheer anger. The things that they decided, the angles and routes that they decided to go down, I just didn't like at all. I've kind of, again, similar to you, I've kind of reevaluated it, and I've tried to put a lot of the stuff that I don't like about it out of my head and just take it for what it was. And, you know, I still have major concerns with it, but, you know, that's one of those things. But of course, I mean, we have heard some of your comments actually through the Facebook group, which you've godly posted into that group, and you've appeared a few times on the mailbag, which is great to... yeah, I like to chuck in my 2 cents.
You do. And that's what I would really encourage anyone who's listening to this to do that, because the group is developing and it's doing really well for itself. And we do like to have the difference of opinion of different people. You know, there's no point going into an episode and saying, I absolutely love this, and not have, you know, issues of concerns and things like that. So having a dissenting voice on certain episodes, and, you know, someone saying they absolutely love it for this reason, or even viewing it from a different viewpoint, I think is really healthy, and I think that's really good. You know, and yeah. I mean, I personally, I thought it was really good. So
yeah, I think with fandom on particular shows, it hasn't earned the fact that you have to unquestionably love it. I think anything deserves as much scrutiny as anything else, and if there are things that it's not doing well, you should call it out. I mean, I'm not saying that people are purposely ignoring these problems, but I think there's an element of that somewhere, certainly in some circles, where, you know, legitimate concerns are sort of dismissed as being, well, yeah, you just hate new Star Trek, or you just hate new Star Wars. And it's not that I hate new anything, it's just that I didn't like this aspect of it, or
Yeah.
Things like that. It gets really hard to have a reasonable discussion about these things when people are just going straight to the pillar of, I'm going to be offended by whatever you've said. It's no use to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I'm in a couple of fandoms, and there's a couple, generally, most of the people that I've aligned myself with, we have healthy debates, and, the Star Trek universe is no different. We've got people that we like to talk to and like to debate with. But as you say, there's certain elements within our fandom where they'll particularly go at a certain level, or, even in older fandoms, I talk about the X-Files, and I've recently had a conversation online about a certain element of the X-Files, which I actually quite like, and some people don't.
Yeah.
And, you do get occasionally the kind of attitude of, well, I'm right and you're wrong, and I just think it's wrong, etc., etc., etc. But on the other side, it's like, well, this is my argument, and when people aren't willing to listen to the argument, I think that's where problems occur. But to have a healthy debate, I think is definitely worthwhile and worth talking about.
When people throw it out, for example, with Discovery, there was a lot of chat about, this doesn't look anything like the original series, and it's like, well, it was never going to, but if you can't get past that, then maybe you should reevaluate whether you're watching the show, because what are you really going to get out of it if you're constantly thinking, oh, they're using touchscreens. Why are they using touchscreens?
Oh, why there's a hologram? Why are they using holograms, etc.? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I yes. For me, I do have debates about that. I'm not really that concerned about things like that, as long as the story's good. We are talking about Star Trek Discovery today, and particularly, as I say, we're at the halfway point, effectively, of the show, and the episode that we're going to be looking at is Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. It was written by Aaron Eli Collette and Jesse Alexander. It was directed by David Barrett, and it first aired on the 29th of October, 2017. This is a particular trope of TV shows and films to do a time loop episode. Are you generally a fan of those type of episodes and or films and things like that? Is that something that you would naturally enjoy?
Yeah, I always enjoy a time loop, especially when it's done well, because it has to reveal something about those in the loop, I think. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless. But some of the celebrated ones I can bear in mind is Groundhog Day, obviously, which is, well, it's probably not the first, but it's probably the one that kind of popularised the concept, as in lots of people saw it. There was sci-fi shows doing it long before that film came out, most likely.
Yeah, well, Next Generation's Cause and Effect was a year before as well.
So there we go. Yeah. Supernatural had a great time loop episode in its, I want to say, third season. That was a great one. Legends of Tomorrow had one in its third or fourth season that was really funny, because that show is just funny. It's just so off the wall and hilarious. But in the way they framed it, is the characters were immediately dialed into the fact that they were in a time loop, even though there was only one person experiencing it. As soon as she would tell them, they'd be like, right, cool, I know what that means, because we're aware that we're in a sci-fi situation. So, yeah, those are the ones that come to mind immediately as kind of examples that I really enjoy. So, I'm a big fan of repeating. I mean,
one example for me is one of my favourites of modern day is the Doctor Who Heaven Sent one. And similar to what you've said with the one you've just mentioned, that they automatically dialed in. What the Doctor Who one did was they gave you clues throughout the episode before then revealing it was a time loop episode. It took quite a long time. It was always the back end of the episode. Whereas other ones, like say Monday from the X-Files, for example, that's a repeat of the day Monday. But Russian Doll, that was a TV show that was based around the whole concept as well, which was really good. If anyone gets a chance to see that on Netflix, that was a really good show. Russian Doll, I would definitely recommend that.
Edge of Tomorrow, the Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
And Person of Interest did a really interesting one as well, where the computer in Person of Interest was pulling out all these different options for them to go down to try and work out what the best plan of action was for the group to get out of the situation they were in. So it was all like rather than it actually happening, it was all theories and algorithms being at play to work out which was the best way to do things, which really worked. But what I think a really good episode does in this aspect, and you've briefly touched on it there, is the real good ones always have like the character at the heart of the story. It's not so much about the loop itself; it's about what these people are dealing with. So I would say something like Heaven Sent was really important in Doctor Who's lore. There was an episode of Fringe called White Tulip, which is always put up there on a pedestal, where it was dealing with the events of what the main character did to his son. And in this one, we see a few little bits, but it's mainly about Michael's relationship and her development. And so if we just start with that, really, with Michael's kind of awkwardness and the idea that she spent these 7 years on the Senjo, and, you know, she mentions during the course of the episode that she's never been in love and having to work through this thing that she's having to deal with, which is the main heart of this episode in some ways. What did you make to that arc of that within this episode of showcasing that Michael hasn't developed this emotional, empathic side of her up until this area, and she's struggling during this episode?
It's very typical Star Trek in a way, isn't it? Because you see all these shows that are set aboard Starfleet ships, and by and large, most of the characters have kind of given up on the notion of a personal life because their service to Starfleet is the be-all and end-all of everything. Picard never had kids, he never got married. Riker sort of he sacrificed his relationship with Troy in order for his career. Janeway, well, she was engaged, I suppose. All sorts. You know, they are fully committed to the job first and then personal relationships second. I think it says a lot when they spend their downtime still wearing their uniforms, because they are always ready to just go back to the bridge. Yeah. It's kind of limiting in that sense, and I think Burnham is an example of that. I mean, she's had difficulty with resolving her human side and her adopted Vulcan side, and that's a big part of who she is. And she must have focused on advancing through the ranks on the Shenzhou and then getting to the point where she was ready for her own command. And now she has to reevaluate herself because that career blew up in her face because of a decision she made in the moment. It only took, 10 seconds to kill her career, basically, which is crazy when you think about it. But
yeah,
it's really interesting that she is starting to think about personal attachments. So Tyler is newly on the ship. She's growing closer to him. Tilly is someone she's embraced as a friend, and Tilly is probably one of the most human Star Trek characters we've ever seen in that sense, because she is very open, she's very awkward, she's very ambitious. You know, she's got it all, and I think she's a great counter to Burnham's more reserved personality.
You mentioned about the aspects of Shenzhou and her career goal. It's almost like a tale of two stories, really, isn't it? Because she even mentions in this episode that she's first officer, that she didn't want to fraternize with the crew. It would be inappropriate, as you say, in that Star Trek world, really. You know, as you say, you mentioned Picard and Riker. You know, we've got people like Sisko, for example, who did have a family, but that was taken to one side because of what happened in the Best of Both Worlds. And you know, he's wanting to be on the outer limits of Federation space and literally lives on a station. So it's different. Again, it's this whole Starfleet aspect. And when the show was first coming out, it was, I've mentioned this before in a few episodes ago, that the fact that the show was going to not focus on the captain and it was going to focus on someone else. It wasn't the way I envisaged it happening. But there is this element on this episode in particular that they are focusing more on the personal life and the relationship than it is about the actual events that are taking place. And this one really pulls out that from Michael's point of view, because she is dealing with past 7 years of being who she is. She's passed on to having that 10-second thing, like you say, with the killing of the Klingon, and she's got a second chance. And Discovery seems to be a place where there is these people who aren't quite Starfleet. You know, we've got Lorca. We haven't really figured out who Lorca is at this moment in time. Stamets is now starting to almost cross paths in this episode with Burnham, and they're starting to form a relationship. We've got Tilly and things, which then leads to, you know, various different aspects. I'm sure we'll touch upon Stamets in a little bit, but this all leads to where I'm coming to here with the disco, the disco in the mess hall or wherever that may be.
Disco on the disco.
Disco on the disco, with the disco T-shirts.
Yeah.
But you mentioned also as well the fact that Michael didn't know how to fit in because she wears the uniform to this disco. First off, what did you think to the opening with the disco and the choice for doing that, especially because it's not something that we've really seen before that I can think of in Star Trek history? What did you make to that opening scene with that?
So I thought it was really interesting because we do have a party that's a bit more traditional in terms of our modern sensibilities. And I think there's a big part of wanting to open Star Trek up to a wider audience. Because I have heard people say that based on limited exposure to things like Next Generation, it can come across as a bit pompous. And I do think that's a fair point, because if you watch a given episode, they're always quoting Shakespeare, and whenever they listen to music, it's like classical music. So it doesn't seem like much in the way of pop culture survived to the 24th century. You do get that opening up a little bit in Deep Space Nine when you do get a bit of jazz and swing from the 60s.
Yeah.
And earlier. So, you know, something survived, or there is niche people that still follow these things, but there is no real pop music or anything that you really find. So it does feel a bit, or there can be a barrier to entry, and I don't really know about Shakespeare, or I don't listen to these composers, so, you know, what's in this for me? And then suddenly you've got a party where they're playing sort of loud club music, or the Bee Gees, you know, the repeating start of the Bee Gees song as the time loop restarts. I think that's really good. And if you think about Next Generation, where if you imagine you're maybe even a civilian or an ensign or whatever, and okay, what's happening on ship tonight? You know, what can we go do? It's like, well, do you want to go to Data's violin recital in 10 Forward? It's like, no, not really. I mean, these are once a week. Do we really have to take over the social area of the ship with this? Is everybody interested in it? So I like that there's that, this music did survive and people are into it. And people are into having fun the old style. And I think Burnham almost represents that the old school Star Trek fan. We're not comfortable in large crowds with popular music, you know, standing off to the side. I mean, that's the cliche, and I think there is some truth to that cliche. Speaking as someone that hates going clubbing myself, I am Michael Burnham in that scene. I'm off to the side, waiting for the night to end, wondering why I'm there.
I'm not quite Michael Burnham, because I tend to arrive at the party when everyone's going home, and just purely from a personal point of view, being in a band that, you know, you finish and you go into town and you have a few drinks and chill out. And I do find myself a little bit, actually, strangely enough, in my youth. I'm saying in my youth, but when early 20s, where there was a club which had a jazz piano player playing at the end of the night, and we always used to go there for the end. So I see myself more as a Picard or a Data, watching the jazz.
Yeah, that kind of stuff's fine for me, I think. But that kind of nightclub situation is not for me at all, and I couldn't. Yeah, I just can't enjoy that sort of thing. If I'm in that situation, it's because someone else wants to be in that situation, and I've just, okay, I'm here, I might as well be here. But I do appreciate that there is that diversity, and I think that the fact that the bridge crew are largely quite young, you've got Detmer, who's said about 10 words since the show began at this point.
I don't think she hasn't said much more since either, though.
And Tilly, she's a cadet, so... yeah, they're young people just having fun, and it's good that happens in the Star Trek universe, because we've seen very little of it.
Yeah.
Tom Paris is about our 20th to 21st century interest sort of guy, and that was about it.
Yeah, well, another thing that they actually do is the inclusiveness of the group that's within there as well, isn't there? Because there's the wheelchair, the guy in the wheelchair.
Yeah.
You've got emotionally compromised science officers in Michael Burnham, but you've got heterosexuals, homosexuals, you've got a drunk Tilly. So they're actually, as you say, by using that Discovery disco and this inclusiveness as well, it may be just a touch on the nose, a little bit, But it is. But as you say, it is trying to appeal to that kind of audience. To say it isn't all Trek, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just a little bit looser than we're used to, and I welcome that, because I always did wonder, does anyone know about 20th century rock bands in the 24th century?
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I'll get into this when we talk about Harry Mudd as well. There's a parallel that can be drawn with Harry Mudd as well, which I'll talk about later. But it is interesting that they are having this disco, because in the opening personal log that Michael does talk about, she is saying that they are winning the war, that the Discovery has become the weapon to use, and they've actually had quite a few successes now. They are getting to the point of the war where they believe that they are getting to a point where they are winning the war, that they can relax, that they do need their personal space and their personal time to go to this disco. But in the show up to this point, so we're up to halfway through, do you think that they've done enough to showcase that the fact that they are in the Klingon War arc, that there is this winning mentality in the episode?
Not especially. I think they've done one thing, really. They saved the dilithium mines on Korvan 2. That was, 2 episodes before?
Yeah. The
previous episode was Sarek was near death in a nebula somewhere. The episode before that, you had Tyler come into it and Lorca kidnapped. So you've had no real view of the scope of the war, and it's clear there's been a bit of a time skip since Tyler came aboard, so clearly Discovery's been tasked with some kind of stealth missions where they're jumping into a place, blowing something up and jumping out, which is fine. We don't really need to see that, but yeah, I think the log entry is a bit of a stretch to suggest that we're winning the war. It's like, yeah, the sport drive works and we're doing stuff. People are feeling a bit more positive maybe, but to say they're winning the war at that stage, they're definitely not. Because it's not an episode or two later where there's still sneak attacks happening on Federation ships all over the place. They can't replicate the spore drive. It's still not great for Starfleet at this point, surely.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the reasons why I asked, because 2 episodes was the one that I covered, and when Lorca actually did get kidnapped in Choose Your Pain, and Lorca's telling, basically telling Starfleet that we've done this, we've done that, and there's one item which is the Korvan 2 situation, and then over the last couple of weeks they've done this, this, and this, and that was all off screen. Yeah. And again, this is another point, and I understand what they're doing, but it's a viewpoint of we are winning the war. This is what's happening, but all of the things that you've seen are off screen. There's no Starfleet battles. There's no no indication that they've gone through stuff to get there. It's more a case of you've been told this is where we are. And when I first heard about it being somebody not a captain that we're following, you could take it down one route, and then they started talking about this Klingon war. You'd expect more, and I don't feel that they've really accomplished that. They've gone a different route than what I would expect.
Yeah, and we don't really need to see these random little skirmishes they keep having, because they're not hugely important in the larger scheme of things, because they still need to impact our characters and so on. I'm actually thinking about in the Pale Moonlight, how they have the casualty list.
Yeah.
So you don't see the war, you don't see what's going on. We only get that kind of bubble that Deep Space Nine exists in. But that casualty list gives you scope. It tells you this is going on, this is having wide-reaching repercussions, and people are affected by it, even though we're not doing anything about it kind of this week, really.
Yeah.
So maybe something like that, although it could just be propaganda that's fed to the junior officers to make them feel better as well. Well, I don't get the impression that Lorca would do that, because he's very hard-hitting when it comes to, right, guys, you're utterly useless. If we'd entered a real combat situation and behaved like this, we'd have lost. And I don't think Burnham would believe the propaganda either, especially since it's her voice telling us that, yeah, we're doing great, we're winning the war. It's like, she wouldn't believe it.
I think in the Pale Moonlight, you mentioned about the casualty list, the way that's relayed to the audience is the reactions of people reading that list, where this is like a Starfleet log, which, a lot of people will criticise a lot of new Trek stuff that don't have the personal log in. It's a bit of exposition. It's a bit of an exposition dump, but Star Trek's used to doing that. But there doesn't feel to be any gravitas of that actually happening.
No, and the casualty list is an interesting one because you see people lining up, like a lot of people lining up to look down the list to see if a name they recognise, and there's no dialogue there. It's not, you know what they're doing, and it's very clear and it's very emotionally resonant because you can imagine how you might feel anxious about the fact that in this wide galaxy I've got friends that live hundreds of light years away. Are they okay? And you're looking for these names. So you don't really get this in Discovery as such because the junior officers, the bridge crew, aren't your focus. Burnham is, but Burnham's issues are much more internal, and she knows where her family are and she knows they're fine.
So let's move on to Stamets then, because Stamets is an interesting case in this one. I think it's actually lined up really nicely with using the mycelial network as the go-between for these loops that are happening, that he's not affected by them in the way that everyone else is, that he's the one that's holding together the piece of information that we get when we move into the next loop, for example. But there's also there's also little inklings of what's to come and what's been before, with his unusual behaviour right at the very beginning. How did you take that, his behaviour? Did you take it as him on a high, or did you take it with the work that he's doing with, obviously, the spore drive? Or did you take it that he is being ultimately affected by what's happening with him with the spore drive system?
Yeah, because he's very standoffish when it starts. The first episode he's in, he's not very pleasant at all. I actually liked him and how blunt he was in those early appearances when he has these kind of standoffs with Lorca about how his research is being applied, and in the Corvan 2 one where he says, I'm going to leave the ship and I'm going to take my research with me, and Lorca's like, well, actually, you sort of signed a contract that gave all your research to us, so if you leave, it stays.
Yeah. Just
think about that. But the fact that it's unlocking bits of his personality, this is kind of the first time we really hear about it.
Yeah.
And then you see an example of him drumming on a computer console or whatever that suggests, oh yeah, he's lightening up a bit. And then, he does seem to be a bit spaced out when he bumps into Tyler and Burnham in the corridor. And I don't know, I think they're playing it a bit much. They get a bit more subtle with it in later episodes.
I think the first time we see him, he's very kind of out there, isn't he? He's it almost feels like to me that's almost, it can be viewed as almost an addiction at that point, that he's using this spore drive and he's being affected by it, and he's seeing all these things within the network. But as the episode goes on, it draws back from that because he's effectively living the same 30 minutes as well, that has worn off. And the way that I saw that was the first time around, he was being affected just by what he's doing. And whatever the mycelial network is doing to him has an adverse effect on him. And whether or not he's actually at an addiction stage, or it's just literally the first couple of times it's happened that he's having that. But what did you make to his further interactions as we get deeper and deeper into the episode? He's the one that keeps the episode tied together. And then his eventual kind of dancing scene with Michael and his pouring out of what him and Colbert, how they got together and how he deals with his relationship. What did you make to that?
Well, I really loved the fact that they chose to use Stamets as the one who's aware of the time loop, especially because he's not our central character, Burnham is. So it becomes how he observes Burnham through each of the loops and sees how she reacts to certain things, because the main emotional struggle for her in this episode is finding a way to essentially tell Tyler that she likes him, because that communication barrier, she can't break through it at this point. And she does mention she's never been in love, so she doesn't know how to make those kinds of connections, which makes you wonder what her kind of relationship history was before this, because she's quite outgoing in the first 2 episodes. It's clear that she and Giorgio have a bit of a back and forth, and you would imagine there's people on the crew that she might be reasonably close to and things like that. So I don't know whether she's lost that ability to connect to people or she never really had it, and I suppose being a first officer would be an excuse to not have it.
Well, she effectively says that, doesn't she, when she talks about that, so yeah. Yeah,
and then it's that, again, the cliche Star Trek fan can't talk to people, but it's, I'm not obviously I'm a Star Trek fan, so I'm not intending to insult anybody by saying that, but I think there is kind of some truth to the fact that Star Trek, or people who are a bit socially awkward, are drawn to Star Trek because, well, for a variety of reasons. And, I think I can certainly say I've been socially awkward a lot in my youth, and Star Trek is a comfort blanket that you can put round yourself when you're having trouble actually relating to people. And so you can see where she's coming from, and she definitely finds a way to express that, because Stamets gives her the example of, here's a completely illogical way that me and Hugh got together, and it worked, because our personalities were such that we sort of complemented each other in that way, So,
yeah. Well, he mentions directly, doesn't he, that their whole relationship works on honesty, and that they were honest from the first second, and that's the success to their relationship, is that you have to be honest. And what I liked about that, as you say, the way that they delve into that with Michael, and Michael actually does turn around and goes, I can live with honesty, because that's the Vulcan way. So I really like that little connection.
Yeah, and it's the fear of putting yourself out there, isn't it? Yeah. She doesn't want to admit that she likes Tyler, because doing that changes the nature of their relationship. And what if he doesn't like that, and then they're on the same ship, and she's got her baggage because she's a mutineer who's supposed to go back to prison when it's all over, and he's been tortured by Klingons for 7 months. So she keeps finding excuses not to tell him, whereas Tilly's like, yeah, go for it, screw it. Whereas Tilly's a lot younger than she is.
Well, yeah, and I think, and Stamets, as you say, that it's interesting, that dichotomy actually between Stamets and Tilly, because you do have like Tilly who's just out there, and she's wanting to experience new things, and she wants to be captain. She's an idealist. She absolutely loves the idea of being captain. She wants to have a good time. She wants to have a good party. She even says, soldiers was her thing. Then musicians, currently the thing for her, until Tyler starts talking, and she went, "Oh, soldiers might be back in the swing of things," which I liked. That's a great little Tilly piece, that, and as you say, Detmer's in the room as well, and it really kind of it really works, the fact that you've got that. But Stamets has gone beyond that, and is in a loving relationship with Colbert, and Stamets is viewing it from a different viewpoint. So Michael's really stuck in the middle between the two of them, and I think that both of them will complement each other, and it kind of works in that. And especially given that we are in episode 7 now as well, we've had the 2 episodes of her as an official first in command. We've had the breakdown of Michael's character. We're building her back up, and I can see that that's the reason why they did that. They wanted to break her character down until we get here and beyond. And, obviously things will happen in the next few episodes, which will have a massive turning point for her. But she's lost everything, and now she's got to build it back up again. And I think that really works quite well. Yeah,
and Tyler teases her about the fact that she's not willing to open up as well. In several of the loops, he specifically calls her out on the fact that she's ignoring the thing that's between them. So you can understand that he would be keen to not hang around, because, again, he was tortured by Klingons for months on end. So he probably feels that life is a bit more finite than maybe others do. So the fact is, he is admitting the fact, look, there's something here. Why are you denying this? And then when they get the call to go to the bridge, and he's like, oh, saved by duty, aren't we? Yeah, there's a few of those moments, isn't there? And even to the point right at the very end when, it said, I would have liked to have been there, when revolving around the kiss. Yeah. So I think that is really well structured in the way that the story unfolds. I mean, we've managed to get through at least 40 minutes and not really spoke about the main guest star and character at the moment. So I think we need to talk about Mr. Mudd. He was last in Choose Your Pain, and there's a couple of things, as I say, that I wanted to talk about this, which I alluded to earlier. Was in Choose Your Pain, he starts to talk about the little people down there, that Starfleet are obsessed with being Starfleet and being the Federation, but Mudd's saying there is other people. There is actually people around. We're talking about Mudd wanting to make money from this. You've got the whole Stella with the father element, that he's an arms dealer, and
there's a lot of things going on around the Star Trek universe which we haven't dealt with before. Pretty much, you got things like the Orion Syndicate and various other bits that we've had within the show, over the years, and we have very, very quickly delved into those, but not really in any great detail. And then obviously Star Trek Picard, you've got the Stardust City Rag, which came out, which again kind of alluded to this sort of thing. My question would be just on a little bit on that, what your thoughts would be, but also this idea that Mudd is seeking revenge on Lorca, that he's wanting to sell the ship, he needs to get back to Stella, but that the whole Stella argument, it rarely resonates, because a lot of the time it's all about him wanting revenge on Lorca and to sell the ship, where obviously from my viewpoint it's very much just I want to sell the ship more than any revenge, or the fact that he wants to get back to Stella. How do you view Mudd and his character with regards to that, and the fact that there is he has a different story for different people at different times when he needs it?
He's a con man, isn't he? So he's probably not going to be entirely honest with anybody, or he'll have multiple purposes. It's interesting you say about the whole civilian life in the Star Trek universe that we see very little of. There's isolated episodes where you see bits and pieces. TNG's family is one of them. The Picard family are isolated on their vineyard and don't care about the rest of the universe, basically. And there's I forget the name of the episode, Honor Among Thieves, maybe, in Deep Space Nine, where O'Brien's hanging around with, it's like Orion Syndicate type stuff, I think, something like that. But other than that, you don't really see much of how these things work. And it must be there, because it obviously is. And we're not really focusing on it now. It's just been mentioned that it's a thing that, Starfleet isn't everything. The Federation isn't everything, and that's true. And in terms of Mudd himself, I've got issues with Harry Mudd in this show because he's not Harry Mudd to me. Okay. Harry Mudd is a goofy character in the original series that was a bit of a nuisance for Kirk on 2 or 3 occasions if you count his animated appearance. And in this, he's very calculating and very sinister in a lot of ways, and that's just not him. I think Rainn Wilson is great in this role. I just don't think they should have called him Harry Mudd. And I'm not one of these people that say, you can't change anything about Star Trek canon or whatever. But I think if you're going to specifically use the name Harry Mudd, there has to be some connection to the original one, especially since it's a few years earlier than that version. And this just isn't him. I couldn't imagine Roger someone, doing this, behaving this way, or engineering this.
I have a bit of a less of a concern about that, purely because I'm pretty sure I've seen iMudd, but I've only recently saw Mudd's Woman, because I'm currently going through a watch of the original series. And, as much as I do love the original series from what I've seen, I've mentioned this in previous podcasts as well, that I'll own up, and I haven't seen all of the original series. I've seen elements of them, and I've actually seen more than I expected to realise I'd seen. There's episodes like, hang on a second, I remember this one. So I'm quite surprised by how many I actually do remember and do know. But it wasn't until I started watching them, episode by episode, that I've gone, oh, right, okay. And there's been a couple that, that I've gone, oh, right, that was really, really good, that. But I haven't seen it before, which has been great. It's been great to do that. But I don't have the connection to Mudd that, like yourself, would have from that point of view, because I've only really seen it once, and it hasn't had time to develop in the brain to thing. And I think you're right with the whole Rainn Wilson. This version of Mudd, purely from my point of view, really works as a character. Just as a character, if it was Mudd or by a person by any other name, it would work. But I understand this aspect of, is it the original Mudd, and can you acquaint the two together? Can you link the two together? Is it possible to have the same characteristics? Is there an argument for that this is slightly earlier? I wouldn't think so, because you're only talking a couple of years difference. Whereas if you were talking 20 or 30 years, i.e. like in a Picard show where you haven't seen the character for 30 years, things can change. But, in a 2 or 3 year gap, or 10-year gap, or whatever it might be between this and the original series episode, I'm not sure you could really count that.
Yeah, it's just really jarring to me, because I'm watching Rainn Wilson, I'm like, you are so good, and I like the idea that this sort of a person exists in the universe as well, but it could have been anybody, because I'm not sure who you're trying to appeal to there. I mean, fans of the original series, if they're going to be annoyed at your portrayal of Harry Mudd if they're annoyed at the fact that they're using touchscreens and things like that. But
yeah,
it's just, I think a lot of people might react to it as in he's just not the same guy.
Yeah.
And I think Rainn Wilson could play that goofy version of Harry Mudd, but that's not the tone of this show either. They could have just had their own conman type character who is on the run from his arms deal daughter, wife, or girlfriend, or whatever she is at this point in time. You can have the same elements, and it doesn't need to be that connection, because the connection's not doing anything.
Yeah, well, no, I can totally understand where you're coming from. Moving into this whole concept has come because Harry Mudd was in this jail cell in Choose Your Pain, and he comes back to get revenge on Lorca and to steal the ship. Is effectively the story. Lorca in this one is interesting in a lot of ways. The whole idea of this Gormaganda that's appeared that Harry Mudd uses to get onto the ship, and he must have known about the regulations about being able to bring it onto the ship in the first place to be able to do this in the very first loop.
Oh yeah, it's irresistible bait.
Yeah, exactly. But what I quite like about it is the little nuanced nods that we get to Lorca's true kind of story. Things like, the fact that it's regulation that Starfleet has to bring this thing aboard, and some of the nods and stuff like that Lorca does, as soon as they mention it's Starfleet, he's like, oh, well, bring it on then. Almost as if he doesn't quite know. Little nuggets of information that's within there. But then we also get the murder scenes and stuff like that with regards to Lorca. How did you think that all came together with this revenge plot with Mudd and Lorca's little nods to what will potentially happen a few episodes down the line with Lorca? Yeah,
so I resisted the notion that Lorca was up to no good for the longest time because I thought it made perfect sense that you do have these captains. You have these captains that join Starfleet for different reasons. They're not interested in scientific exploration. They're just, they're warriors, and there are need for those people in certain times. The Klingon War is one of them. In fact, the villain of Star Trek Beyond was such a person, where he was like, I don't want to be part of this federation. I don't like it. I'm a combat guy, and I've always been a combat guy, and I will always be a combat guy.
Yeah.
And Lorca is like that. So you can imagine a version of this character that is very focused on the war. And then once the war is over, there's no place for him, and he can't effectively command a ship because the mission's different. He just can't care about cataloguing an anomaly of some sort. It's just not who he is. So I do know that the original Lorca was probably that science guy, the I love to explore. He's probably that, but I like the idea that he's that different sort of captain because it's just different. And I get that, or I feel like he could quite reasonably not know that regulation about the space whale because he doesn't care. I mean, it's that, well, regulation says we bring it on board, and he's like, yeah, whatever, do it. And then I recommend that we have security present when we be aboard, and he's like, I don't give a damn what you do, I just want it done. And that's a nice little nod. It's just, I'm going to trust you to do whatever you need to do. I just don't want to be involved. I'm just going to sit in my chair and it's fine. Call me when we need to blow up some Klingons.
So what are your viewpoints on Lorca then? Because I think, I spoke to Amy Nelson, she's pretty much in love with him. I absolutely think he's a fantastic character up until this point, especially. And, even just as a normal Federation Starfleet officer. Something, as you say, we haven't seen before. Is he someone, if things had been different, that you would foresee as being a great show lead for us to kind of take Discovery down that route? If they decided to go down the usual captain, first officer route, would you have enjoyed a Lorca type show?
So even though he's pretending, which we always have to bear in mind when when rewatching the show, at first I wasn't suspicious of him at all until the reveal, because I wanted that captain, and because we haven't had it before. Sisko's probably the closest, but even then he still gets excited about the exploration side of things. And he did, even though he was pretending, he had those values as well. When the Pavans were at risk, he was like, right, they don't deserve to be destroyed by the Klingons, we're going to defend them. And he's very loyal to his crew as well. I mean, we know he scoops up the Prime Universe version of Landry because he was close to the other version. Burnham, he has that weird, incestuous almost relationship with in the other universe, so he puts her close in this one and things like that. But I don't know if, let's just say he wasn't revealed to be a mirror universe spy or infiltrator, then I don't know that he could go into the mold of, okay, we're in this system exploring this weird anomaly that's just shown up, because he wouldn't be interested.
Yeah.
Episodes like that, he wouldn't be anywhere near it. He'd be like, whoever my first officer is will handle it, and I'm just going to sit in my chamber of horrors and sharpen this rare knife that I found.
With a fortune cookie.
Until this is over. So, I mean, he could have led the show, and I think it'd be a different show, and maybe you tailor Discovery's mission to that captain's style, because you shouldn't really be putting people in charge of stuff they don't want to do as such. Although there's plenty examples of that in our world, people doing jobs that they don't like or don't want to do. So
yeah,
it's a weird one. I mean, the fact is we can write him off because we know what happens to him, and we never meet the Prime version.
The best thing in these films or TV shows, it's all in the edit. It's how you edit all together. Because you always have to begin, well, you don't always have to, because there's been episodes that go straight into this, as you've already mentioned, but you have to go into this with a certain viewpoint or a certain way into the way that you're going to develop this, whether that be like it is here, where you get a good chunk of the first lot of scenes, like you would do in Cause and Effect, for example, to lay out the story, and then you start to replay the rest of the messages, and then it's all about how you edit and how you develop that, because you've got to push the story forward. As much as it's a time loop, you don't stay in that same time frame, or you don't stay in the same scenes. You have to move on, or like in X-Files, where it's played a bit more for comedy with Mulder's waterbed, for example. There's differences in that, but as the episodes get on, they get tighter and tighter with the edit, and it gets quicker and quicker and quicker. And in this one particularly, it's all about Lorca's death scenes, really. That's what speeds things up. But in the loops themselves, is anything that you would want to pick out that you particularly liked from the edits that became a really good moment for you? I mean, it could be anything from, like, as I say, the likes of Stamets and Michael's conversation, which is the moment where it slows down, actually, where we get to talk about the emotional aspect. The quick edit is more about, playing it for a bit of levity because of Mudd's character and the fact he's just wanting to kill him time and time again. But is there a particular element of the loops that you liked within this episode?
The Lorca death montage was hilarious. Just right. How many different ways. Well, most of the time he was just being shot and vaporized, but I like the wave of the hand to beam about into space, and you see the little bit of hesitation before he just suffocates. That's a really funny one. And although I'm always more interested in the character beats as much as I enjoyed the Lorca multiple death scenes.
Yeah.
So the fact that Stamets gets to know Burnham a lot better throughout this, and Burnham essentially doesn't really know him that well by the end of the episode because they don't have that conversation in that section of the loop. But Stamets comes out of this knowing a big secret about her, knowing different things about her, seeing how she reacts in different ways, and I always like it whenever they step outside the actual loop scenario within the loop to show you something else. So Tilly scanning the whale, for example, is kind of, all right, this actually hasn't happened at all before. Here's the different perspective we can get on this situation that's happening just sort of over here, or even though it was a difference caused by the fact that they knew about the loop. So yeah, it's just the editing's very good. It's very well paced.
You mentioned about that Tilly one. I actually put down that Tilly's wearing a going out gear while at work. Yeah. And
she's probably really drunk as well.
I've been in that situation, and it made me tickle. It made me laugh a little bit. I was actually off today, and for various reasons, which won't go into, but most people will know, was an international emergency, worldwide emergency at the moment with regards to COVID as we record. But I have a video call that I do every Wednesday, and this is a Wednesday that we're recording on. And that was my only scheduled thing today. I'm actually on a rest day. I was just going to take those hours back. It wouldn't be a problem. But I got a call to say the fire alarms are going off because the builders are working there. So I had to go out and just, in the clothes that I'm wearing, nothing in particular, like bad or anything, and went out to work. But there's been many a times I've been driven there before when I've got in at 3 a.m, absolutely paralytic, and I've had to wake the missus up and go, "You've got to take me to work." So, but I actually just as I was watching it before, I'm thinking that I've just done that today. It made me go back and think about those memories of being drunk and going into work. But I quite liked it. I quite liked the I like the actual thought that they goes back to the disco scene, I suppose. That, as I say, it is right in that timeline.
Yeah,
but it gives it a bit of variety. I know that Picard has done it before when he's been in the holodeck and he's doing his detective series and he's come out and he's having to wear stuff. You've got him on Star Trek First Contact, for example, where he's still wearing the civilian clothing when they come back in. But I always like those little nods that, they are actually doing something other than just running the ship.
Yeah, or in Generations when they're wearing their holodeck sailing gear.
Yeah.
When they get called to the bridge, and Tom Paris would often show up in casual clothes or dressed as Captain Proton and need to fly the ship, and things like that.
Yeah, and I always like that because it just gives it that sense of like they are doing things outside of their work.
Yeah, they have a life.
Yes, exactly.
Not much of one, but they have one.
They do. So a couple of things before we wrap up. First of all, I just wanted to get your thoughts on Michael's realization of her appealing to Mudd's sensibilities once she hears that he has everything the Klingons want, and then suddenly realizing, well, actually, you don't. What your thoughts of that, really? And Michael wanting self-sacrificing herself because she knows she's going to be in the next loop anyway, but it's a really good way of actually getting the loop to restart, isn't it? To help develop that loop. And what you thought of that? It's
almost that culmination of the fact that she doesn't know how to connect to people because she doesn't understand how to relate to people, and then suddenly she understands how to relate to Mudd because she understands what he wants. It's not quite the way that she would probably want to do it, but she does understand how he thinks.
Yeah.
Eventually. I mean, it might take a few loops that obviously she's not gaining knowledge from those loops, but she's kind of getting enough to put things together. So, yeah, she manages to appeal to Mudd's sensibilities as a man who wants something and needs something from them. And I kind of found the ending a bit weak. It's like, oh yeah, we called your girlfriend and her dad are coming to keep you out of trouble, which will maybe last about 8 years until you get loose again and for some reason and start causing trouble again for another captain on another ship somewhere.
Yeah.
But I guess it's at the point where, all right, we've had our fun, now we need to resolve this. How do we resolve this? This'll do. He's mentioned his girlfriend, we'll call her and that'll fix it.
What I like is the characterization, going back to Lorca, is that Lorca himself as a character knows that Harry Mudd knows about the Baran because they talked about it in Choose Your Pain. It's a good, nice bit of, retelling of that. And Lorca uses that to his advantage by saying, I don't want it, you can have the ship, you can take it. I do like that aspect. I do like the idea that Lorca is using that. But then that also adds to the fact of how good Lorca is as being the infiltrator that he is, because he's so adept. We've seen it in previous episode. We've seen it with different people that he's able to adapt to the situation, and will do whatever it takes to actually come out the better of it. And I think that's a really good use of Lorca in that scene.
And it's a very nuanced portrayal of a Mirror Universe counterpart as well, which you get some of in Deep Space Nine, but in the original series, the joke is that Spock rumbles the fake Kirk right away because he's acting like a lunatic. So it's when we know that he's a Mirror Universe guy, it's like, he's a sinister and calculating guy because that's kind of what you have to be to survive in that universe. That's fine. I'm still kind of annoyed at how easy it is to hack a Federation starship, but it's something they never fix. Because Mudd is fully in control of the computer. It's like, how the hell does he do this? And you have to wonder why aren't Starfleet hiring these people that keep hacking their ships to, the same way that sort of the NSA hire people that can hack into their systems because it stops them doing it and it helps protect against it. Or Catch Me If You Can, the guy starts working for the government because it's better than him actually getting around them. So...
Or seeing the frequency through Geordie's visor, and that's rotation at a certain frequency, and that's it, you're done. There's sometimes some simplification, isn't there? But the only thing I would say with that scene you were mentioning before, with when Stella does arrive on the ship and they've managed to fool Mudd to destroy the time, not replay the last 30 minutes like he has been doing for how many times that he's done that for, which must be in its like sort of 50s to 100s or something.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
That when we do get towards the end of the episode and it all starts to come together, that the music develops into like a normal Star Trek theme, and it kind of has those callbacks to the original series and to Next Generation. You know, where would you put this in kind of the season 1 era of Star Trek Discovery, really? How far up the ladder would you place this episode, and what do you think of it overall, before we start talking about your social media and where you can find you?
Well, it's quite high up in the pantheon of season 1, I think. I don't know if it's my favourite one. I'm not sure what my favourite episode is, though. It's difficult to say. It's probably the most... Well, it's I guess the expensive Discovery version of a bottle episode, because you never leave the ship.
Yeah.
And it uses the main cast, and you still have the effect shots of, weird zooms into the crew rec room or whatever they call it, and Discovery with its weird camera movements that it always does. And you have a couple of guest stars that kind of come out of nowhere with Stella and her dad just at the end. But I suppose it's probably the cheapest episode they've made, because there's very little in the way of stuff going on apart from a full CGI space whale, which is probably not a cheap effect. But yeah, it's quite high up. I think maybe the first Mirror episode is my favourite one, because I like the way that it just reestablishes the Mirror universe as this strange, unwelcoming place that you need to get out of immediately. But this one's quite high up. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I think anybody that says that Discovery is no fun, and I think I can understand where you're coming from in that respect, because it is very hyper serious in previous episodes. There aren't a lot of jokes, which is fine. That's the tone, and I don't think it overpowers it too much. But in this one, they do cut loose a bit. They lighten things up a little bit. It shows that it can do that. So yeah, it's a good one. I
think it lands at the right time as well. I think you've got, as I say, halfway through the season, there's been quite a lot of dark episodes that have come so far that, we're at a point now where the ship is that they're saying about this winning of the war aspect to it, but it puts it in a place where they can just have a little bit of fun with it. We've had 6 episodes of quite, full on stuff. Let's have a bit of levity, and then let's move into the second half of the season, which, and we know from other things that the production behind it is a wealth of information that we could go in and talk about for hours, but we're not quite there yet. But yeah, so I do think that it's a nice piece of levity. I'm really interested to see what I think about the Mirror Universe stuff, because I don't, in previous Star Treks, I'm not the biggest fan of them. Is it just that you've not been back to it, or? I don't know. I mean, I didn't particularly like the Deep Space Nine Mirror stuff anyway. I didn't not like it in Discovery, so I'm just thinking back to it. I'm not sure whether or not that it will really come to me or not. I don't know. Well, but it's going to be interesting to see how it gets in there anyway. Yes, so Craig, thank you very much for coming back onto the show. My pleasure. You'll be with us back on later in the season, won't you? So we'll be happy to see you on there as we head towards the back end of the season. But meanwhile, where can people find you online? What have you been up to of late, and where can people find you online? So you can find me on Facebook or Twitter under Neil Before Blog, or you can go to neilbeforeblog.co.uk. We've had a few podcast stuff happening recently. We celebrated Star Trek Day with Generations, as in First Contact Day rather than Star Trek Day with Generations, because we did First Contact years ago, so we're just kind of doing random films for a bit. Did the first season of Picard, which obviously you guys covered as well, but did our own kind of spin on a discussion on that. We did The Phantom Menace recently for Star Wars Day, which was May the 4th, which was only 2 days ago, so that's worth a listen. We talk about having toys and cereal,
and all these 90s nostalgia things that you can think of. One of the contributors does a dramatic reading of the William Shakespeare Star Wars book, which is, have a listen. It's quite fun. And I'm not sure what else is coming up soon. Might do a bit of a chat about Clone Wars now that that's finished. Quite excited about that.
Yeah, Clone Wars is actually something I've not watched any of the Clone Wars until recently. When Disney Plus came out in the UK last month, and I've watched the first season, so I'm really looking forward to watching Clone Wars. Actually, it's I
won't say what happens at the end.
No, people have alluded to stuff on likes of Twitter and stuff. I've gone, nope, not watching that, not looking at that. But yeah, I'm really interested into seeing what the Clone Wars is all about, really, because when Disney Plus first was announced, and they said they were going to be a subscription type, the first thing I actually thought was Clone Wars. So so it's definitely something that I'm looking forward to getting my teeth into, really. And season 1 was okay. I enjoyed it, and from all accounts, it gets a hell of a lot better as the seasons go on. So,
the thing about Clone Wars that's interesting is it covers the widest scope of the Star Wars universe that you can imagine. So there'll be entire arcs that you just won't be interested in because you don't maybe like that aspect of Star Wars. We're going to focus on the bounty hunters for these 4 episodes. Don't like the bounty hunters. So you either have to power through that episode or those episodes, but you can skip them because ultimately they might not have a huge effect. For me, I like my Jedi in Star Wars, and there's plenty of that, and it redeems the prequel era as something that can have good storytelling in it. And it makes better characters out of Anakin and Obi-Wan than the films could ever hope to do. So, plus Ahsoka, such a good character. She deserves all the praise she gets, and she deserves to live on in different ways. And it seems that she is. So, well done for creating her. And hopefully one day, we're likely seeing her in live action fairly soon, actually. But she's a good character, and she fits right into the Star Wars universe. And it's not like they're ashamed of her in a way, in the sense that she only exists in Clone Wars, so we'll just never talk about her again. She's resonated with people, and it's quite clear that she's important to that universe.
Fantastic. Well, great stuff. Yeah, I mean, as I say, that's even made me want to watch it even more. So that's what I'll be doing during the next few weeks and months. Looking forward to that. But you can find me on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is @rmuldrake. That's RMULDRAKE. Obviously, this podcast that I'm on now, we've got the Millennium podcast, the TV show Millennium from 1996 to 1999, which starred Lance Henriksen, who recently turned 80. So that's At the Time Is Now pod. And that's the Time Is Now podcast. And you can also find me on the Xcast. We're currently doing the Fight the Future Minute, which is the Fight the Future, the X-Files movie, which was released in 1998. We're going day by day, minute by minute. So we're currently talking about, at the moment, we're in the early stages. So when this airs, we'll be a bit into the show, maybe about half an hour or so into the film. And that's been fantastic over the first few minutes that we've aired so far. It's been a good laugh. And and that's basically it at the moment. So you can find me there. But until next time, everyone, let's set a course for the next episode 8 of Star Trek Discovery, and engage.
Previously on the We Made This Network. Free with this month's issue.
And also, I wonder if Tim Harrington and Colin have been in the same room together.
I've still got slightly more hair.
Because you go onto the Wikipedia page, and for a moment I thought Colin was wearing a multicoloured feather jacket.
I am. Yeah, I am. Yeah. If you were on a Skype call, you'd see that. But I'm not in Les Savvy fan.
Cinemortuary.
A lot of interesting things with that mechanic, couldn't you? I'm sure the sequels probably play into it. Like, if it's not your turn to die, people just jump out of planes and shit and they're fine.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. That'd be a good one.
Yeah.
If I read a game, as a character, would you risk that in case it was your turn? In case there's like some information you didn't know about someone else has been saved, therefore it's your go now.
I mean, if I knew it were going to come eventually, I would absolutely get some knuckle listers on and fight my way into the White House just with my fists. Just like, I mean, if you're going to go out anyway, just like man in polo neck, charges into White House, takes down 300 Secret Service, shits on Donald Trump's face, and kills him by slamming his head in a drawer.
Life's milestones.
So, what do you think? Are we going to go with compostable, Chris?
I like that as an idea. Well, there's the Hunter S. Thompson firework idea I quite like as well.
What's that?
You had these ashes loaded into a rocket and just shot up in it as a firework.
Amazing.
Whether that's true or not, that's the legend has it. Anyway.
Well, you get quite a lot of ashes. You could have a firework. You could then have some thrown into your garden, or you could then have some in a necklace for somebody else. You get a lot of ashes, and you don't need a lot of ashes to make.
It's a weird thing. I don't know if I know anyone who's been cremated and then had the ashes. I must do, but I can't imagine having someone's ashes in the house. So that feels faintly creepy. I would follow various kind of dog forums on Facebook, and you can get dog ashes. And
I've got my cat's ashes. I've got cat ashes on the mantelpiece.
I can somehow see that more than a fellow human.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, was created and is produced and hosted by Tony Black and Kurt North. You can find the show on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard and on Facebook in the Make It So, a Star Trek podcast fan group discussion group. Check out the We Made This network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and on Facebook by typing in We Made This, and you can find all of our shows on our website, wemadethispod.com. Thanks for listening.